What I have noticed increasingly is that the world seems to reject when we acknowledge the harm that has been done to us and the impact that it has had. This is increasing not just politically, but also in personal relationships. So, more and more, the person who has been wronged becomes the problem. Why do you think that we as a society villainize the victim?
because the because the person who's speaking up is challenging the equilibrium. And if you're challenging the equilibrium, people get uncomfortable when something shifts. Please don't shift something that's working. Now, it's not necessarily working, but it seems to be working well enough. It's almost like a ship that's sailing and somebody says, I see there's a small hole. If you ignore it, it's actually going to be part of why we're going to have a problem when there's like a big thunderstorm or we're going to hit choppy waters. And then most people will say, stop, we're busy, we're drinking, we're partying, we're enjoying, and they try to shush that voice. Okay?
Well, it's a great analogy also because it feels like we live in a world where number one, someone can harm you. Number two, you're required to speak up. And then number three, you need to be prepared for people to be mad at you for having been hurt. Right. So that is, I think, the path that has created a situation where victim became a dirty word. It makes me so angry when people use victim in the pejorative. If you have been victimized, you are a victim. Why are you the bad guy? This week, I'm thrilled to sit down again with Esther Goldstein, a New York based licensed clinical social worker and trauma therapist, also known as the trauma therapist, to talk about why it seems like we as a society are so uncomfortable when people speak up about personal injustice and why we are so quick to vilify the victim. On today's podcast, we're diving into why victim became an insult or a pejorative, how victim blaming protects the witness's sense of stability, and how the perpetrator and their enablers use projective identification, the bystander effect, and the just world bias as part of their toolkit to keep painting the victim as the villain, just for voicing the harm that they have endured. And above all else, we are digging into what you can do when people refuse to help or even hear you.
Can I pull apart the three things that you just mentioned? Let's just
Mm,
look at the bigger picture, right? Like the world is a place where there's love and there's pain, right? That's just like the reality of life. And then there's like systems in our society, systems in the court, systems in our community, systems in our family that either can hold the capacity for really uncomfortable emotions and realities and to challenge their lived experience or their template of what they believe is. Back to the equilibrium. Okay, so if people are very tied to a certain belief, anyone who's going to challenge that or make them think out of that box will make them uncomfortable. And because people are uncomfortable and that makes them feel scared and they're not willing or able or interested in making that change, okay?
You know, the common control tactic that people will use is to insult a person by saying you're playing the victim.
I want to just say something. I actually
Yeah.
think that um, the that it's not anyone's place to tell someone that they're acting like a victim or to be judged for a level of emotional intensity because at the end of the day there's direct correlation between being believed and to being heard and responded to and the person who's been hurt. Let's just talk about anyone who's being hurt, their nervous system and their mind and body and their behaviors settling to
Yeah.
people being ignored or challenged or judged, and then the level of emotionality gets louder and more intense. So when people come in and they're like, oh, this person's dramatic, if a person is continuously ignored, then they go into like freeze, submit, or collapse, which is basically, if you look at, I was just looking at this Impala. There's this video that talks about the survival strategies in animals because it
Uh-huh.
tries to show you what humans go through. And when you see this Impala in the wild who's running, it shows you how like an animal who's basically about to be attacked
Mhm.
and is about to be eaten. If you realize that you can't run away or fight with the perpetrator who's going to attack you, the body goes to this place of like freeze because the level of pain, if somebody chomps into that body, is less intense if it's in freeze. And also, the perpetrator is less interested in attacking you if you just look like you're playing dead. And so, actually, if they're being dramatic or if they're being expressive, is a way healthier sign to me than a person who goes to submit or shut down because then it's like the baby who stops crying.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I love the visual of the impala. That's powerful. And I was going to ask you about kind of I was gonna bring up the phrase victim blaming, and the phrase victim blaming seems to have emerged to note when a person who was physically assaulted is asked idiotic, offensive things like, "What were you wearing?" That's victim blaming, right? It's when stupid, horrible people ask rape victims what they were wearing. That's what victim blaming is, right? Like, "What were you
Yeah.
drinking?" That's what it
Because
is.
that's where
But
you're starting to shift. Basically, what you're doing is you're completely like going completely off topic to like the basic facts that are important, and you're bringing in a completely different reality that is not relevant to the facts of what went down. You don't ask somebody all those questions about
right.
like there's why are we offloading responsibility from who the responsibility actually belongs to?
Right, exactly. And, I think this is what was going through my mind when I was trying to figure out how you extend victim blaming from the individual to all of society, right?
Mm.
Because it feels like that movement to force a person who has been victimized to justify themselves has now extended to almost all of life. And so, this idea of using the word victim as a pejorative, how can we fight people who reject our legitimate voicing of the harm that has been done to us? How should we respond when someone paints us as the problem for naming the wrong that was done to us?
I want to just give you two terms first. If you look at the neuroscience, there's
Yeah.
something called projective identification. Projective identification is basically, let's say me and you are in a fight,
Okay.
and I'm really upset that you're bringing up something that I did wrong, and I can't tolerate it. I can't tolerate the hurt or the upset that I might have caused because I don't have the capacity to hold what I actually may have caused.
Okay.
And so, what I will do is I will project onto you that you are dramatic and that you're lying to me. Okay, let's stay with this for a second. Project. So I'm projecting that onto you, and the identification means that you unconsciously start internalizing what I'm projecting to you, and you start acting out in that way. And so, what reinforces my projection? It's literally
You're
an
training
unconscious
me,
thing.
you're calling me a monkey and training me to dance like a monkey.
Yes, and unconsciously, it's what happens. It's kind of like I'm giving you the monkey card, and it's this unconscious dynamic. You're literally becoming the identity, or you have become the identity of this, what this person wants, because they are offloading something that they cannot tolerate.
And it traps you because
Of
they're
course,
going
it
to
traps
say you're
you.
being hysterical. And then the next time you do anything, like for example, they kick you in your back and then you say, ow, they're going to say, I lightly tapped you. Why are you so hysterical?
Yeah, well, you'll see that physically, but even it's an unconscious, almost like transfer. That's why it's called like projection identification of like a certain energy and responsibility. That sometimes happens,
Yes.
and people will even start saying like, "Wait, why am I acting this way?" Or I don't, or like this dynamic brought out a very toxic or graspy or angry side of me, right?
Hmm.
Once they're
Hmm.
out of the situation, and it's like, yeah, well, you're not crazy. This was the dance that was happening unconsciously. I think
Okay.
that's one. And there's something else when it comes to trauma or like children in terms of like development, which is basically if somebody does something wrong to me and their behavior carries a lot of shame.
Yes.
If they
Mhm.
cannot tolerate the shame and if they
Yeah.
cannot apologize or hold it, they're going to displace the shame onto you. So you're going to walk around holding the shame of the behavior. Let's say I have a boss who's very rude to me, and people respect him. And I'm feeling very upset because he's disrespecting me. When he sees me, he might have a level of like disgust about me. It's not about me, it's the behavior that he is noticing in response to me that he's having a like a disgust reaction to. Because if he's not holding it, then I hold it because energy has to go somewhere. I guess what I'm trying
Question
to,
question a little
yeah,
deeper on that projective identification because I've never heard that phrase before. I love this.
okay.
Like these little nuggets I get from doing this podcast. Uh, you bring up a grievance to a person. They cannot hold what the truth of that grievance says about what they have done. As a result, they project onto you some sort of a negative trait. You hear it enough, you start to identify with it. Is the trait that they're projecting onto you specifically something they don't want to be, or is it just a deflection of the focus of the conversation? They're just trying to get you to stop talking.
just a deflection. It's kind of, let's say you're in the room and there's like three shades, like gray, white, and black, and they'll acknowledge it's like gray and white, but they will completely ignore the black. But you
Mm-hmm.
see the black right there. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're almost like staring at the black. And they're just like, it's not necessarily about something that they don't like. It's like it's a like projecting onto you.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's like reflecting it back onto you versus I know that what I did was wrong or this wasn't okay.
Right.
Um, I guess I'm naming this because I just want to help people understand
No, it's
these
powerful.
dynamics that are at play. And I think that, like,
And there was something else you wanted to name too in the context of how do we handle people in this situation? Was there
yeah,
another
so
definition
I
you wanted?
think just like I think one is just even identifying when that's happening,
Yeah.
because if we don't identify it, we could get pulled into this trap. And then I think the other piece is taking a step back and looking at, like, who am I as a person? What are my values and what's actually happening here?
Hmm.
Because I think if we don't have a reality check, it gets very difficult to respond to the scenario because we could either get trapped into like fight or flight, or we could kind of just go to, could I want to just show you for a second? I'm taking you with me.
Yeah.
I want to show you like the survival responses from this flip chart that I have. I think that I want to talk about the internal before I even talk about the
Okay.
external,
Yeah, yeah.
because in some scenarios, there's not enough safety to engage with the other in,
Okay.
right? Because we want to be clear on like what's my ask of this person. For some, it's like asking nothing of them. Basically, when something unjust has happened and somebody ignores it, like I said earlier, we've spoken about sometimes people do have a sociopathic trait inside of them, so that's one element. But since we know most people are not sociopaths, the other thing we were talking about is that there's something called a passive bystander. So this can be not the person necessarily that's harming you, but other people who are kind of watching
Mm-hmm.
and see what's actually going on. They did see and they did notice. And to that is like a passive bystander is someone who notices
Mm.
and isn't vocalizing anything. And
Yeah.
that almost could feel almost like more of a trauma or a harm, because it's like, fine, there's the bad guy or the bad woman or the bad, but what about everyone else who's witnessing this? Like
Right.
sometimes that's more of the trauma, because it's like, can there be an outrage or a voicing or a
Right.
supporting, like come around this person? So passive bystanders sometimes do more harm. Passive bystanders, either they themselves have like a very high level of terror or weakness inside of them that they don't have capacity to speak up. I'm not excusing it, to speak up,
Yeah.
because they will have to contend with the reality that they are unwilling or unable. I like saying unwilling, but it's usually connected to unable to tend with. So if I speak
Mm-hmm.
up,
Right.
I'm then willing, and then I'm acknowledging the fact that I'm willing to tend to, I have the foresight to know what's potentially going to come after this.
And that by
It's,
failing to act, you are actually enabling it because you
no,
could
you
have.
are acting. Wait, it's an act.
Yeah, you're
Not
acting by
acting is
choosing
an
not to do
act.
anything
You're making just as much noise as if you stood up and took a microphone and stamped your feet on the ground.
and said you
Doing
deserve
nothing,
this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's just as loud. I always say, I'm like, these are both very loud responses. Some people are like, no, I didn't say anything. I said, you didn't say anything?
Yeah.
You watched and you were
Right.
present
Yeah.
and you stood.
Yeah.
That's an act. This is
And
as
by
loud as the
watching and not acting, you are actually sending a very clear message to the perpetrator that you're okay with it.
You're right, you're aligned with it. Basically, it's
Mm-hmm.
a very uncomfortable scenario. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say you're a passive bystander, but you feel like there's something unjust. You can actually not speak up to the perpetrator because of your own fear or your own worry. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a way to then communicate with the person who's being hurt and saying, I'm not okay with this behavior. I just want to say, or I want to acknowledge what I'm noticing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure what to do, or I don't have the right words, but I just want to say, I see your experience. Like there's many routes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I want to talk more about the personal situations, right? I want to talk about when you challenge the bystander, when you challenge the person who you think may be enabling someone to hurt you. What's your best advice? What's your best advice for responding when someone paints us as the problem for naming the harm that was done to us? If it's not the perpetrator, if it's someone else who is
Right, right,
enabling
right.
them.
I have like a very unsexy answer, which is
Okay.
basically, I think, um, who are the people who are in your corner who can see the truth for what it is? And can you notice what the person is saying to you when they tell you who they are and what they are okay with by their actions and their words.
Yeah.
And then because what happens is that like there's like this huge level of like being deflated or being dropped, because essentially if like here's a person who's harming and here's the person who's close to them or supporting them, and essentially there's like a reach, so it's like either you're going to acknowledge me
Mm-hmm.
and the reality, or you're going to ignore. So when we reach and
Mm-hmm.
we're not responded to, we feel dropped. So I think that my answer would be, how do we deal with it? I think it's like being aware of what this person is saying to me loud and clear by their actions and their behaviors. And then how can I set expectations for this person where I'm not continuously let down?
So, unfortunately, what you're saying is when someone paints us as the problem for having been wronged and naming that wrong, the only thing we can do is accept that they just showed us who they are.
And grieve that, because it's very painful, because
That's
essentially
terrible. That's very
it's
unsatisfying.
I'll
Okay.
tell you, I'll tell you why that's not satisfying, because that's not even the picture. Really, the picture is
Okay.
owning your story and knowing who you are, and having your people and places where who you are and what everything that you've experienced is acknowledged and responded to with a resounding like heck yes, or I totally see this, or you don't have to waste any more breath explaining it to me, or like oh my goodness, 100%, like you painted this picture, enough said.
Yeah.
Like that's the whole body, like heck yes, or wow, or like the kind of response that your nervous system needs when you've been wronged is one where
Mm.
you are received and acknowledged,
Mm.
and the body goes to this like shriveling up and becoming very small when you're reaching to someone who either is half blind or half deaf or makes you doubt yourself.
Yeah.
And essentially what
Or
I'm
just a
saying is
horrible
like,
person. Yeah.
what?
Or just a horrible person. They could be fully not blind and fully not deaf and just a horrible person. That's the clinical term.
Well, that means that their heart has become numb. I think that like often these people are very unwell. Like I know we could say they're horrible. To me, I look at them. I'm not saying they're not horrible, like call them horrible. To me, you have to be a very sick person to have someone reach out to you or ask for help and you to turn them down,
Yeah.
because that's a level of like your heart has been frozen, and you must be very broken inside if you don't have capacity to actually say or do anything. Like that's to me is like, how can you walk around or notice that?
One other thing I would put into that is when we look at like family systems, if you have been wronged by someone and you reach out to a member of their family just to stop the abuse, just to stop the mistreatment, and the response shows you that that person is not only not willing to acknowledge what you've been through, but the fact that it's still going on, then I think it's not just about accepting who they are, it's about maybe understanding that deeper level of the family system from where your abuser emerged, right? If people start to make sense when you see the systems around them that set them up to behave the way they do, and then you can think about your own world and think, well, maybe if I have a an immutable sense of expecting people to be just, it's a compliment to the system in which I was raised.
Yes, like it's
And
just
lucky me, right?
yeah, I think there's like two pieces. Like I just know for my own self, when there was a scenario where I once said something to someone from this very like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like super
Mhm.
passionate, like someone who I once spoke to about like health and wellness and healing, and so I was sure she would have like a good response when I mentioned something. Um um and after the fact, I remember speaking to one of my good friends because I was so deflated by her response. And she was like, "You thought she was going to respond well?" I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Right, but you targeted something very close to home. And if
Ah,
you targeted something very close to home, then you are asking her to have to renegotiate so much of her reality, the relationships that she's tolerated or allowed, dynamics that she's okay with, but also like anger that she's repressed. If you're going to ask, because I said something, I was like, can I just talk to you about something? I noticed the dynamic in this family structure, something that's been going on for years. I can't believe it. I just noticed it, right?" And the response was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Wait, hold on. Where are you? Like, hello, we spoke
right.
about this so many times
Where did
about
you go?
so many other people, and like you were so supportive, and like, and I'm just telling you something I just noticed."
Right.
And she was like, wait, have
He's
you
like,
gone crazy? And I was like, wait, are you actually talking to me? And it took me time to be like, actually, if you're touching too close to a raw nerve that is going to challenge their entire identity
yeah.
or make them negotiate something that they never looked at or are terrified of looking at or are too scared to look at, you're going to get that kind of response.
And so there's like a light bulb or a sign behind your head where or a bubble behind your head where I'm seeing empathy costs too much to people who benefit from the systems that hurt you, right?
Is it empathy or is it truth? They can't handle the truth. They
Same
cannot
thing.
tolerate they can't tolerate your truth because they cannot tolerate their own truths.
Right, but it's like that's the thing. It's not even your truth. It's the truth, right?
The
Like
truth.
the
Yeah.
truth. Empathy, because the empathy that it would inspire costs them too much.
Well, it will cost them to make different choices than they're making right now,
Right,
and they may not have the capacity to do that.
right.
And then really back to what I was saying about grief is like, first of all, yes, when we're coming from a very just place, there's a bittersweet beauty and like I love that I'm some wholesome. I love that I really just want this like reality to be acknowledged or to be respected.
Yeah.
And then there's a grief and maybe almost like an anger of like, wow, like this entire system has this like cancerous toxicity breeding within it.
Mm,
And sometimes there is within a family system or in a structure one or two people that are like pulling away or challenging a system. But it comes with a very heavy price tag. That's usually like the black sheep in the family who's speaking up,
exactly. I think that's what
right?
you just kind of illustrated, right? This is exactly how slavery went on for hundreds of years. This is exactly how the one person who speaks up in a family system gets labeled and kicked out because people cannot abide letting their system fall apart. And that, I was reading an article that I wanted to bring up with you. It was in The Guardian. It was a journalist named Maya Solovitz who said research suggests that this is actually a side effect of the human desire for fairness. It's called the just world bias. Have you heard of this?
I want to hear.
Okay, so it said our brains crave predictability. And as
Hmm.
such, we tend to blame the victims of unfairness rather than rejecting the comforting worldview that suggests that the good will be rewarded and the evil will be punished. So Melvin Lerner is the researcher in the 1960s who coined the phrase just world bias. And he said just world bias can be seen in any situation in which victims are blamed for their own misfortune, whether it's abuse, sexual assault, crime, poverty, anything. And so the first experiment that Lerner did, he had actors who were supposed to learn to provide the right answer on a verbal exam. Uh, the experiments involved women. The women were asked to observe what happens when you force people to learn through punishment. So when the learner, who was an actor, gave the wrong answer, she got an electric shock. Afterwards, observers were asked how likable or morally worthy she appeared. And I think you know where I'm going with this. One group of women that just saw the victim getting repeatedly shocked tended to dismiss her. She was stupid, she was lazy, she wasn't trying. But another group was told she wasn't really hurt. It was just a teeny, teeny prick. It wasn't a real shock. They didn't blame the victim as much. So the more the victim was hurt, the more the bystander wanted to believe it was their fault. So Lerner explained the results he believed suggested that seeing innocent people get hurt with no resolution violates the observer's sense of the world as just. So, in order to reduce that threat, they see the victim as deserving of her fate. And when you think about it through that lens, it's the height of selfishness because it's not physical self-preservation to want to believe the world is just. It's mental self-preservation so that even a little bit of discomfort entering the brain, leading someone to believe that the world is not necessarily safe, is too costly. You'd rather let the person suffer. You'd rather not investigate. You'd rather believe that maybe they deserved it because otherwise the system that works for you needs to be dismantled.
I
And
think
it's
that people,
horrifying.
what?
It's horrifying. I'm like utterly horrified. And I was hoping before I brought this up, you would give me something more optimistic about people.
I'll tell you what I do, and I do want to talk to you about like survival. I'll tell you what why a part of me is very hopeful and doesn't get deflated by this.
Well, you're just hopeful person. Like you can't
No,
do
it's
what you
not
do if
true.
you're not.
I'm not a very, I'm a hopeful person, but I also have seen people who basically dismiss very strong realities with clients I work with. Like if you see the rage that comes up inside of me, this is the because this is what you're talking about. It's the risk of the rage that comes up
Yeah.
and contending with the reality and this existential dilemma of learned helplessness that happens because if I see someone's helplessness or if I see that someone's being harmed and I don't know if I have the capacity to make a change, that is too uncomfortable for me to tolerate. I'm saying me as a human being. And so what people's natural tendency to do is that they basically will blame someone. I'm just saying for myself, like I remember speaking to a supervisor saying, how can I treat these survivors of trauma when I get so aggravated? I'm like, I get so angry. I literally took up boxing and I said, I don't want to ever go to this place of not caring anymore. Because if I don't care, there's no way I'm going to be powerful as someone who's healing and as someone like I get very emotional. I get very impacted.
But the caring
What's
so much was like hurting your body, so you needed to get the anger out, right?
I don't, it was hurting me only if I didn't move through it, but I didn't want to stop care, meaning like the level of anger that I feel inside of me. I want to come back to this point to give you something more fulfilling, but I also
Can
want to
I
acknowledge the
interrupt?
grief.
I have to
Yeah.
say this is really satisfying because
Okay.
people want to believe that their therapist cares, right? And that they are seen. And like if you if you can hear about the things that people go through and you cannot take it personally, that's hurtful, especially when people are coming to you telling you their most personal thing. So I absolutely love for you the
Hmm.
concept of you doing what you do and then going and kickboxing. I feel like your clients should know that you're kicking because you're so angry you're kicking.
They actually, I will tell you something. Like I'm very transparent with clients when they talk about like energy, and I'll talk about like I want to come back to this piece because
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
also give you something somatic based
Yeah.
on like what to help you from a place of empowerment. But no, I'm very like for me, it was like to be a vessel of healing. I want to allow those emotions to come through me and move through me versus it staying stuck or versus me having to disown that part because you can only
Yeah.
tolerate a certain amount. But I want to come back to what you were saying. There's a certain level of injust, and to be able to provide a level of like validation, or like what I just said, like a full body yes, or like, oh
Hmm.
my goodness, this is such not okay behavior, or let me just explain to you what this person is doing. So they 100%, like to anyone listening here who has been violated or victimized or been hurt in any big or small kind of way, or watches things that are going on, I just have to say, like, it's we see that reality and it's so important to have people who see it, that you don't have to waste your breath. Like it's like we need to have people in our life that just see the reality as it is, and when you explain it they see it, they get it, they understand it, they want to, because that's part of like you almost reinforcing and getting that like acknowledgement and validation of what your experience was and is. That's like the most important piece. The reason I'm bringing up client pieces is because if my body didn't have a reaction to, let's say, the injustice, or let's say a power dynamic, or like seeing how even in the legal system, I've gotten very angry about some legal systems. Instead of just saying, oh, it's not going to go anywhere, it's like, no, let's talk about all the choice points of what you have.
Uh-huh.
Let's look at where you do have a voice. Let's say interacting with someone who you know is going to ignore you. I wouldn't say to come from a helpless place.
Well, and it goes back to projective identification because that is what is so vicious about it. Like to simplify, you name a harm that has been done to you. The person you're naming it to is supposed to help and acknowledge and care. In many cases, they're not. They're actually enabling the person who is harming you. But not only do they continue to enable that person, they then project onto you a label that's not accurate. And often that label is hysterical or dramatic. And now you're not only hearing it, but you're also more likely to stop talking to your friends about it. And even if it keeps happening, because then what are you doing? Then you're being overly dramatic. You get sick of hearing your own voice. So it creates sort of this horrible loop and trap where you can see then the caricature of the woman scorned. Where did it come from?
Okay, but
Right?
this is where I actually want to pause. Every single person that I know, I was actually looking at who was it? Jay Shetty. I was like, I was looking at Oprah Winfrey. I was looking at some of like the big thought leaders and people who I feel have made different kinds of impact.
Right.
I just did this weekend, and I wanted to look for their pain story. Because to me, the people who have the most power in the world, who I really respect, have a very deep pain story, have a
Yeah,
very deep loss story.
every
That's
single
who I
time.
respect, and that's whose message resonates. So, as
Hmm.
you're talking about a person who's been victimized, what I'm looking at is like, I want to hear the story of that victimhood. I want to hear the story of their pain. I want to hear about their despair, and I want to hear about their darkness. And I also want to know who are they committing themselves to becoming in addition to this. Like, this is part of your story. I'm not going to say to ignore it. Who are you? What have you become more cognizant of? What's your fierce commitment for your life, for your loved ones? Yes, this is part of your life. And maybe there's going to be times that this feels bigger and this feels smaller.
Yeah.
Who are you in the bigger scheme of who you are and your commitment to marrying those versions of yourself? And what kind of impact are you making for your loved ones and the universe because of this story, which could feel like a scar. Like I sometimes say,
Yeah.
like, people who speak very loudly, look at their backbones. A lot of times they have scars engraved on their back. They have tattoos that are not so pretty. But like, who are they to
Hmm.
the world right now? So that's almost what I'm curious about.
I
Like
love
in
that. I love that. And even when I first interviewed you, I was asking you about your story as well. Why does this matter so much to you helping people
right.
with trauma? Because that's the only thing that makes it interesting and makes it feel tangible when people have a lesson to share. So it's like what you're saying is number one, for your don't apologize for the way that you were hurt. Don't leave it out of the story of your life and don't
No.
ever let yourself believe it is the story of your life. Right?
No. It's part of the story.
Right.
It's like I have a huge scar.
Right.
And then it's like I get to choose. Like, if we don't learn how to manage our scarring, or if we don't get to understand ourselves, we could be acting out of a wound for the rest of our life.
Yeah.
Like, there was a time in my life that I was acting out of a wound and I didn't realize. And then, but the person who was suffering most was me, because I kept, and it took me time to find like the right kind of way of acknowledging, okay, I have this wounding, I have this scarring, actually could be my biggest point that pushes me forward. But I wanted to learn how to hold it and communicate about it, and also choose people who don't have a reaction to me sharing about it. And then going from there, like, I have a tendency to, like, if I see, let's say, I'll speak up for the truth,
Hmm.
and I'll speak up for, let's say, if there's family secrecy. I think I mentioned this. So
Yeah.
I'll speak up for
You're not
it.
okay with it.
No, I can't tolerate it. Even
No.
I've told people, I'm like, I wish I could, because I'm very outspoken. I did have a friend once years ago where we were in a community and I spoke up about a dynamic that I felt like wasn't there.
Mhm.
And she said she would have my back. And as I spoke up and she noticed there were some people who weren't quite okay, she started backing away from me,
Oh,
and
yeah.
or from my support, but I
Yeah.
didn't back down. And only way after the fact, because we had kind of a falling out because of it, she said, I have my own scarring around speaking up and feeling like the person who doesn't belong, and my need to socially belong got kicked up there. And you were just there saying, I'm just going to keep speaking into this microphone because this is what I think is true.
Well, and there's a
And
difference between I don't one thing I don't like, not to put myself in the role of the therapist, is I don't like that you said you needed to surround yourself with people who would tolerate it. You need to be with people who will appreciate it. Because
wait,
if they see
I
you
know.
clearly, right, they have to
Right,
see that this was hard won for you. The ability
right.
to speak up was not easy. It was hard won, so they should be proud of you when you do it.
Okay, wait, but you're wait, so one second. The people who are in my circle right now, they love it. They literally talk about a level of like emotional capacity that just exists in my presence,
Yeah.
because anything they say, like, I'm clear, I'm whole, I'm honest, I'm real.
Yeah.
They challenge me. That's like, I'm talking about a fully cooked version of adultness right now.
You're
But
fully
I'm
cooked.
saying, like, when I was younger and I was still trying to figure things out, I think it took my friends or colleagues a level of emotional and mental capacity to track along with things that I was bringing up or challenging that were potentially make them uncomfortable. And
Mm,
it demanded a level of health and awareness. I'm
right.
like, are people nuts? She's like, no, I love how you literally like treat people and you think that there's a level of health and wellness. Which is why you like expect a high bar, or you'll push for a certain level of honesty in
100%.
relationships. Um,
And that's
or
why
to
people stay
acknowledge.
single later in life. I mean, we just went right back to the whole thing, right? You just kind of demonstrated a whole thing, which is because it's not just that you're assuming a level of health. I get where she was going with that, but you are assuming that it is maybe almost as uncomfortable for other people not to do the work as it was for you. You couldn't have stayed in your old mindset
Right.
because
I
your
always tell
brain wouldn't have
people,
allowed you. But you think other people are equally uncomfortable with their own stupid patterns. And again, you're
and
giving
some
people too
aren't.
much credit.
Yeah.
And it's almost like look, you can de-static the truth as much as possible. You can take out the friction of them having to deal with how it hurt you. You can take out the friction of them having to even hear what's implied in how they may have helped this person hurt you. You can do as much as anybody could, and it still doesn't mean, even as a therapist, even with the perfect script, that you're going to get the right response. You may end up kickboxing that night, but at least you did the best, right? At least you did the best you could.
Right. I think the kickboxing piece for me was more of just like, to be honest, it's probably navigating my own existential like helplessness around seeing that there's levels of injustice and there's limited amounts of power that I can give people. I don't want to like spiritually bypass or like have this toxic positivity of like, well, your pain becomes your power. Actually, your pain becomes the thing that makes you cry to sleep for years or months. And then, yes, with the right processing it and with the right support, then there is an incredible power and passion. Anyone I think who has a mission has something that pushed them. And I think part of healing is realizing how much of your life you've built around the pain versus but there are times that pain is the primary focus and we want it to be like and building with it.
Absolutely. And it's not, I will say that you don't come across at all as if you're saying your pain is your power. It's more like your pain is, like you said, the thing that makes you cry at night. And then the way that you process it becomes your power, because now you see yourself
Mhm.
more clearly than you ever would have if you hadn't been hurt in the first place. Like if you go through an easy life, you're never really gonna know. There was a woman I interviewed on the podcast really early, like a year ago. Her name is Carrie Bob. She's a sexual assault survivor.
Mhm.
Um, she was drugged and raped at a conference, and she ended up getting a bipartisan bill passed in Congress called Carrie's Law, which made it illegal to use a clause that was in something like 10 million employment contracts nationwide that said forced arbitration and confidentiality in cases of sexual assault in the workplace. She, like
Wow.
10 million other people, had signed contracts with this clause in it, not realizing that clause was in it. So, what she said, and I love this, she said, like, the one message she would give people was that um, the worst thing that ever happens to you could end up being the best thing that ever happened to you, but you have to work at it and make it pay. Right. And so then the story is not the pain, the story is how you process it. And if you meet her, you just feel like you can just punch a mountain right off the planet, right? She's like, she's just not a normal level of awesome. Um, maybe this is
I
good
think what I want to
context.
explain, so basically, this is from Janina Fisher. She talks about when we go through trauma or we go through pain. There's two different parts. There's the part that's been traumatized, okay? And then there's the part that's called going on with the normal life parts. We
Okay.
have the part that's holding the pain or the trauma or whatever, right? We could talk about the person who's been victimized. And then there's the parts that cope. These parts are like the worker parts, the professional parts, the parenting parts, whatever it is. I'm just going to talk about the basic ways that people survive. I know you might not be able to see it.
Okay,
Here's the
great.
fight part, which is vigilant. Okay, so you'll see very angry, judgmental, mistrustful, self destructive, controlling, suicidal, or needs to control. So either they go into fight, okay, or they'll internalize the fight, which is basically like suicidal. Like, I can't exist with a level of anger if it's not actually being heard.
Mhm.
Or they'll go to being very angry, judgmental, like, right? All this like fight energy, okay? Then there's flight, which is kind of escaping,
Mhm.
which is like the person who's the distancer. They kind of will distance away. The runner, ambivalent, can't commit, addictive, or eating disordered. So this is a way of like running away. Like, I'm flighting away from the pain. I can't deal with it.
Mhm.
Next is freeze, like fear. Frozen, right? Terrified, wary, phobic, of being seen, reports panic attacks. So here's like the freeze. So all the energy is
Mhm.
getting frozen in the body.
Mhm.
And it's like just terrified, very phobic, will have panic attacks. So it's all internalized, all that energy, because so the body like panics. Submit is where the person is holding a lot of shame, right? Shame
Mm.
is usually connected to the behavior that was done. So depressed, ashamed, filled with self hatred, passive, the good girl, like the caretaker, and self sacrificing. So they're
Mm.
holding all that shame, the submit. Okay, it's
Mhm.
like a people pleasing part, the fawn part. And then the attach is the cry for help. Here's where somebody will attach and align with a perpetrator
Mm.
or try to attach and try to get close to someone to just sue them. Looks for connection, fearful of abandonment and rejection, innocent, wants someone to depend on. And the reason I'm naming all of this, is this making sense?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So there's fight,
Yeah.
flight, freeze, submit, and attach.
Mhm.
And the reason I'm saying this is because I want people to understand in the face of being, let's say, victimized or hurt, there are ways you will likely find that you have a part of you that has the going on with the normal life parts, which is what Janina, it's based on the dissociation model from Vanderhart, Neuenhouse, and Steele, and then which is like structural dissociation. But
Right.
then Janina Fisher, who's a psychologist, basically spoke about separating it into two different terms, which is like you have parts that have the going on with the normal life parts, and then you have the traumatized parts, or the parts that go into survival. I guess when I think about having to deal with someone, there might be like a cry for help or an attach in a dynamic of trying to reach for someone.
Right.
And it's like noticing what you're expecting and hoping for and zooming out and looking at how can you give yourself that sense of safety or processing through from the right addresses and seeing how you can deal with, yeah, the disappointment for the people who can't give it to you, and giving yourself as much safety as you can in other areas or with the right people.
Well, I like the right addresses because at the end of the day, the best address is you. And if you can do that, then you become Oprah, right? Like it's just like that's pretty clear line.
But Oprah has But I guess what I'm saying is when you ask about this, I think really one of the most powerful ways of healing is really cultivating safety
Yeah, for
in
yourself.
yourself and with others. And I really think that since trauma happens in relation to self and others, self and society, self and community, self and family, I think healing needs to happen in connection with others. And that's why I said the word tolerate. It's because I want to make the bar a little low in terms of like sometimes having people who can hear our stories, could tolerate the pain it brings up in them, can be in your circle, will allow you to be more whole for yourself. Because I think sometimes we have this
Yeah.
expectation of, I need to hold my story.
Let's say someone who's listening is not concerned about having been victimized, and they're not even concerned about whether or not we villainize the victim. Everyone wants to be a good friend. Can we train ourselves to distinguish when someone has been wronged without resolution versus when they are playing the victim?
In terms of the person who you're saying has like been victimized to the person who you're saying is like playing the victim, to me, all that says is there is someone who is suffering and there's a level of either like health and wholeness in relation to processing the pain where there's capacity to talk about it in a way that like this is part of my life. If a friend is still swimming in the pain or the pain is still very fresh, no matter how long ago or recent it is, I think it's a matter of saying like, how can I be supportive to you?
Mm,
Like, or I see how much pain you're in, how can I be supportive to you? And I really think like if you want to manage compassion fatigue, if friends feel like this person's talking about the same thing for so long, getting clear for your own self, like what are your expectations of being a friend to this person? Maybe all your friend needs is for you to be a listening ear.
yeah.
And compassion fatigue comes from when when you're expecting yourself to do, be, or have something that you don't have, versus like if you can say like, is it helpful for me to just hear you out?
Yeah. Something I've been doing with a lot of my friends now is I say if a friend gets to the point where it feels like they're just recycling the anger
Yeah,
again and again and again and again, and it's not new anger, nothing new happened today, then I will say, do you want me to hear you? Do you want me to relate to you? Or do you want me to solve this for you?
I love that. I love those
Because even
questions.
the relate piece is different. Like if I'm hearing you,
Mhm.
you just want to get it out and you actually don't want to dwell on it, but you need somebody to know that somebody keyed your car today and that person also did something else last week. So I hear the pattern, then I hear you. If you want me to relate, then I'll be like, I remember the time my car was keyed and my
Right.
blah blah blah. And if you want me to solve it, then I'm gonna say, hey, I have a good guy who does paint jobs.
Yeah.
I have blah 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 blah
Yeah.
blah. But even just saying that to a friend, I think makes them feel better because then they know A, I'm here, and B, that I don't feel burdened by them bringing it up.
Well, you're also meeting them. You're also really asking, how can I meet you in this moment? So, do you know what I'm saying?
And
And
that
you
it
can
will
even,
end, that it will be encapsulated. That because a lot of people carry around guilt for even sharing what they're going through with their friends because we don't want to burden each other. We don't want to feel
mm,
like we're burdening or like we are a broken record. Sometimes we're sick of even hearing ourselves say the
right.
thing that happened when the thing happened again. But the thing is, it
Like,
happened again. The raccoons are in the
right.
garbage again. When you are wronged on an ongoing basis, maybe it then becomes your responsibility to clarify to the people who you rely on, who want to be relied on,
Mm-hmm.
that this is an ongoing situation. My
Yeah.
anticipation is that I will not stop being wronged. I
Right.
cannot remove myself from this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, once a week, I want to be able to at least tell you the facts of what's happened.
I think it's needed for survival. I think you need to have a place where you're like talking about the reality that you're experienced and seen in a way. So you're not so you're not basically, or else it becomes like unprocessed stuff, then become trauma, anxiety, depression in our body. So being able to process through like this was this encounter in this scenario. Remember, I'm seen as the villain or I'm seen as the dramatic one. I just need to offload about it, process it, or to people who see you for who you really are. And I think that's very important to like almost like so you're not accumulating all of that baggage and internalizing the experience. It's kind of like you're
Yeah.
processing through it in the experience.
And because sometimes the past doesn't stay in the past, right? If the past is a set of raccoons that keep showing up and rummaging through your garbage every night, every morning you got a driveway full of garbage. It doesn't really help the victim to tell them they
No,
should stop complaining.
right. The past is not in the past. They're like, well, there's actually some very present day realities that are very challenging to deal with.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, you're basically saying you've got to package it in a way that will get you the highest likelihood of getting a response that could be satisfying. And that still feels like work, but it is what you did was you kind of brought it all the way around to at the end of the day, if you can come at it from a place of just enough empathy to see that the other person maybe doesn't have it in them to see the world clearly enough to provide you with empathy for the ways that you were wronged, then the process of forcing yourself to see that in them is going to make you able to provide more empathy for yourself. So you're actually still healing. That's very upsetting and very unsatisfying, but I get it.
but you want to know something? You know what I have to say?
Yeah.
Could we also acknowledge that maybe you're in a very significant place in your life where you need to feel like we cannot, that's why I said you can't like this emotional stuff.
Yeah.
Like there have been times and places and phases in my life where I was very vocal about certain things.
Yeah.
And because I got to process, and there was a phase in my life where I was like I think I speak about this, I've spoken about this on podcasts, where I was always the happy person. And me healing was learning how to be angry and learning how to deal with sadness because I never owned those emotions because I was always the happy one. And it was like, I actually want to feel like a whole human. And I want to feel like a deeper level of happiness and a deeper level of wholeness. And so, what I'm trying to say is like, what if we could honor the fact that anyone listening to this might be in a place where they're just noticing that they were wrong? Maybe they're in a place of real anger. And right now, that's what you're going for. And it's premature to say, look, you're going to have a time where you package it and you're going to share it, and either people will respond or they won't respond. But like that's actually going to get you the most out of these relationships because selfishly, like, sorry, I'm going to go strategy for a minute. But in some of these relationships, so let's say I'm not like activated around anymore, to me, it's strategic where like, how can I get the most of what I personally need that I can get, and I'm not aggravating you and I'm not upsetting myself or reminding myself about the incapacities you have, and this is what works. But there's other relationships or dynamics where all of that activation is very active, and it's unrealistic to be like, oh, could you go like 17 steps ahead to the place where it's packaged neatly? Like if right now someone's in a place where there's a lot more emotional charge around that, then that's where you are. I guess I'm just giving a bigger picture
Yeah.
of like, I think people as they evolve and make meaning and get in touch with their power and their identity and their impact, I think it's because the energy shifts a little bit. They process it in a different way. And as they metabolize it, they have more of that energy to then build or create or do, or do you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like, could we allow the human experience of processing information to move through and with us without us forcing it? Like,
I,
meaning maybe you're exactly where you need to be, maybe we're all exactly where we need to be in our processes. So because I want people to know, like, even if where you are right now is not where you ideally want to be, please allow yourself to be at this space, because guess what, allowing yourself to be in it is what's going to get you to the next place, and the next place is going to open up new doors.